link in the chat if you guys want to forward it on to anyone. It says live on YouTube on our end. The link in the chat. There's my voice twice. I hate to hear that. Got that. All right. The link is in the chat. There it is. Forward it on to whoever you'd like. I'm just going to drop it in one little group for our people. Maybe. And yeah, whatever. All right, we're going to get started. We'll go ahead and start the meeting at 4:19. My name is Jay Barbuto. I'm co-chair of the PECTA Confer team. Also proudly serve as PECTA's co-president along with Aaron Frericks. And we're going to go ahead and introduce both teams so those that are watching for the first time can get a little introduction. So go ahead, team.
I'm Marnie Burris. I teach third grade at Lowell Elementary School, and I'm the PECTA secretary and the co-chair of Meet and Confer.
I'm Diana Antone. I teach sixth grade math and science at Lowell Elementary.
April Pettit. I teach music at Dunbar Elementary.
Chelsea McCaslin. I teach sixth grade English at Edison Elementary.
Felina Rodriguez, 7th and 8th grade ELA at Garfield Elementary.
I'm Karen Merkley. I teach music at Capitol Elementary School.
On the administrative side, I'm Victor Diaz. I'm the Director of Human Resources.
Hi, everyone. Shelman Brown, Director of Curriculum and Instruction.
Gina Millsaps, proud principal over at Paul Lawrence Dunbar.
I'm Dirk Olmstead. I'm the principal at Capitol Elementary School.
And I'm Sylvia Bernal, principal at Garfield.
I think that's everyone, correct? Perfect. All right, we're going to get started. We're going to throw it to Miss McCaslin, who is going to actually, can you go to the next slide? Yep, next slide. So we're actually going to skip agenda part 1. We're going to go straight into proposal number 11. I'm going to throw it to Chelsea with some more. Chelsea, go ahead.
Yes, hello. So we are going to be going over proposal 11. The district response to this proposal was that you would like more information. So Felina and I are going to go over some additional information regarding this proposal. We would appreciate it just to save any questions for this particular proposal for when we are done. If there's anything just burning up, throw it in the chat and we'll be happy to respond to it once we get through our additional information that we'll be giving on this proposal. So Felina, if you'd like to go to the next slide. So as just a recap, the proposal that was submitted was for translation compensation. So staff members will be compensated through an hourly wage for all written and oral translations provided above standard contracted duties. And Felina, if you'd like to go into the next moment.
Yeah, so with providing that additional information, we did want to clarify the distinctions between translation and interpretation, especially since we tend to use them interchangeably. But translation refers to written translations and written language from one language to another. Interpretation refers to spoken language being changed from one language to another. So that's the key distinction. And in our proposal, we included both, even though it's referred to as translation. And then just as we continue with our equity goals as stated in the action plan. The way we treat language is the way we treat people. And this is from the Curtis Acosta Educational Partnership, Curtis Acosta, who created the ELA Ethnic Studies program in Tucson, Arizona. And now they have offered a couple trainings with multilingual education. So just kind of the lens that we are approaching this from and the information that we are providing. So looking at the Equity Action Team report, it did not include a breakdown of the languages that are spoken at Phoenix Elementary. So we actually went to the United States Census and found the breakdown of the languages spoken in our district. So we also want to request additional information when you present your counter proposal to us, that we just want to know more documentation about how these families are being communicated with and in what methods, especially because not only do we have many multilingual households, but we also have households that may be illiterate, and we have certain spoken languages that have no written form. So as you can see in the census here at Phoenix Elementary, we have predominantly Spanish-speaking families, along with the breakdown of English as well. However, I did want to clarify that Indo-European and Asian Islander languages include a variety of different languages in and of themselves. We also have dialects of Thai, Burmese, as well as Somali, and several indigenous languages that are slowly facing extinction, which we will get into in a little bit. But this is more of the breakdown of just the languages that we have and why it's so necessary to have these interpretation and translation services at our schools. And so going into the language line itself, the language line has been very helpful in ways that it's been used as educators, and it's facilitated the process for creating phone calls for families, as you can have the interpreter just enter in the phone numbers, and they provide Somali, Kareni, and Burmese. However, when teachers often use this, when we used it for Spanish closer to the beginning of the year and distance learning, it definitely lessened the workload for those responsible for interpreting at our school sites, which made it easier to contact families. However, as you can see, the pros of using the language line is outweighed by the cons. Some of the things we've noticed with just using the language line is that we as staff members have been actively encouraged not to use it, and it is not equitably communicated on all school sites that with all the access code information. So about halfway through the year, the access code changed for the language line, and that was not fully communicated. So students and families that in which we relied on using the language line for, we didn't necessarily have the same ways to communicate with them. And then, of course, thinking about our unique student populations, the language line doesn't offer Mayan dialects. And if we think about the demographics of our students, we only have a small percentage of American Indian students. However, we have a very large percentage of Latino or Hispanic students. Within that subgroup, we also need to recognize that students of Latino or Hispanic descent are indigenous descendants, which is why many of them also speak, along with Spanish, indigenous languages like Mam or Quiche, which are their own smaller dialects of Maya, and those are even rarer languages. And as you can see, I've included information.
Alina, I believe you are frozen.
The United Nations on the rights of Indigenous. Through SCI standards, we're supposed to treat language as an asset, and these languages are most definitely assets for our students. And then, of course, thinking about parent-teacher conferences, with the new challenges that we have faced with distance learning, it's not as easy to speak with families through Zoom and then also use the language line. You would either have to put the phone on speaker and attempt to communicate with families, and then hopefully the Wi-Fi connection will be enough for the audio to pick up the sound from the phone. But that's not equitable practice, and it's not effective for how we want to communicate with families versus when we were in person and you could simply dial the language line. So overall, when it comes to that conference time, it's very difficult to just be able to communicate with our families. And then, of course, when it comes to written languages and written translations from the language line, it takes approximately 2 weeks to process. So when you're trying to deliver time-sensitive information like schools reopening or any survey information and trying to explain what it is in another language, like in Somali or Burmese, that time-sensitive information just gets lost and families don't have equitable access to it. So these are some of the cons that we have observed as educators currently teaching in a pandemic. And so thinking about meeting the language needs at Phoenix Elementary, we did break down all the different ways in which we as educators and as a district, we've observed that we communicate with families and all the things that we expect of them to respond to and all the means and ends in which we provide information. And I've also included the communications that we've sent out just this year in regards to the various differences in which communication and engagement with our families is essential. And looking at these communications, we did have a lot of questions in regards to how we interpret and translate for our families. A big one being is how do we communicate this information to families that are illiterate? Because the majority of these programs and communications are in written language, and that tends to exclude families whose students are the first ones in their families that are learning to read. And then thinking about how some of these programs like Peach Jar or Class Dojo, and even looking up information on the school website or district website for computer support, that requires a certain level of digital literacy that even in our equity plan, it was pointed out that not all of our families have it. So how are we ensuring that families with that limited digital literacy are able to effectively understand and be able to communicate with our staff and so that we as staff members are able to communicate with them? So thinking about this, it is definitely important to think about how we're providing translation and interpretation services. And which leads to the question is, how are we currently compensating teachers who are going in and taking in the extra mile and recording videos out loud of these communications that we are sending out? Especially because we know that some of these documents are time sensitive and are very important to receive in a timely manner. And so I just broke down why we're focused on equitable compensation, because I've included two lenses here. One is from the Equity Team Action Report, and I've highlighted the pieces from that action report directly, in which we state that one of our goals is to provide adequate supports and translation to ensure that all parents receive and understand the information to make informed decisions for their children. So this is part of the equity work that our district should already be doing, and it's very important that we include language and interpretation services as part of that. And so on the other side, I broke down why exactly it's important to compensate teachers for this. And this is from a teacher who is bilingual, and they're a departmentalized teacher, and this is just I'll say lowball effort in terms of how often translation services are used. So phone calls, approximately 1 or 2 phone calls per day or throughout the week, which is about, depending on the families, especially since some families engage in conversation and they tend to be longer phone calls, it's approximate estimate about 80 minutes. And then of course, thinking about Class Dojo announcements. And I know Class Dojo translates messages, but when you post an announcement in Class Dojo, the links that may be in English or may be in written form still need something read aloud. So videos are often used for that feature. And video recording and editing takes a lot of time. It is why no one has ever recommended a simultaneous model, because it does take a lot of planning time. And then, of course, responding to non-English speaking families that send you emails and correspondence as well with, from an SEI perspective, certain students are still monolingual. So communicating with them in their own languages via email. So in total, I broke this down to about 200 minutes a week, 3.33 hours per week. And then the number 32 comes from the approximate number of weeks in a school year when you take out breaks and information. And this, without including the communications for parent-teacher conferences, is a compensation of about $3,200, which is much higher than the current stipend we have and the current compensation teachers are facing. Because the average amount is $30 on the hour. And I provided the translator salaries from Glassdoor, which collects data annually and routinely. And I just wanted to point out that just for having language skills alone, my salary is lower than the salary of a translator who is merely bilingual. And then they go into the distinctions between interpreters and translators. So when we're addressing the concept of a teacher shortage, teachers respond to where we know we'll get adequately compensated. And this is definitely something we need to keep on our radar as we continue to have diverse student populations, because that salary number doesn't include lesson planning and live instruction. It is just solely for the act of providing information in another language. And now I'll pass it on to Chelsea.
Yes. So while we do have a couple individuals per campus that do receive a stipend for translation services, it is clear that, at some schools, more than 50% of families are, need a translator during parent-teacher conferences. And those 2 to 3 people, it would be almost impossible for them to make it to all those conferences. So teacher services are being used. And unfortunately, they're not currently receiving compensation for that. It's also important to look at the law at the U.S. Department of Justice and Education in terms of translation. It does state that it's not sufficient for the staff merely to be bilingual. For example, a staff member who is bilingual may be able to communicate directly with limited English, proficient parents in a different language, but may not be competent to interpret in and out of the language or to translate documents. So we're not asking that teachers no longer provide translation. We're taking this as a growth opportunity to possibly eventually get our bilingual teachers, our most valuable asset, to get them proper training so that we are in conjunction with the law, that we are training our teachers and then they are being compensated for this. I see this as a great professional development moment for our educators. And then Felina, if you'd like to go to the next slide. So our proposed solutions, and we know, we can't, maybe won't meet all this coming up school year, but things to look forward to in the future for growth in this department. One being information. Again, we'd like to request a breakdown of all the languages used by our students and their families in Phoenix Elementary and documentations of the steps we take to reach these families. As a Meet and Confer group, we think it's valuable to have this information so that we can figure out the best processes for reaching all of our families and helping out our communities. We're also proposing staff training. We believe we should provide compensated training to our on-site staff who are willing and able to interpret and translate for our families through an accredited program. This would put Phoenix Elementary School District in compliance with federal law, allow educators to grow professionally, and it would deepen our relationship with the communities we serve, which I think are all very valuable things that we seek in Phoenix Elementary. Finally, compensation. Staff members will be compensated through an hourly wage for all written and oral translations provided above standard contracted duties. We are aware that classified staff receive a stipend to provide these services. We are not asking for the elimination of this stipend, but for expanded opportunities for certified staff to receive adequate compensation for the work they already do above standard contract duties. And that is the information we have for proposal 11. Would you like to add anything else, Felina, before we move into questions?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to the compensation side really quick. This number, it is taken from Glassdoor and it is related to the data, the most recent data in regards to how we compensate for translation services. It is from a departmentalized teacher's perspective, and it doesn't include parent-teacher conferences, nor does it include the phone calls that some school sites made regarding reopening and just return to school processes. So thinking about everything that we have done to communicate with families within the pandemic, that number is significantly higher. And I did do the math for what this would look like with the amount of phone calls we make for 3 sessions of parent-teacher conferences. And you're looking at above this, adding another $1,300 to that number, which is what the current rate for translation is. So this is definitely a significant gap in how well we're compensating teachers for the work that they are providing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making that clarification, Felina. I guess we can leave this time. I know we just went over a ton of information in response to this, so we'd love to hear any questions or comments that any of you might have.
Well, excuse me. Thank you very much, Ms. Rodriguez, Ms. McClassen. This is very helpful, just in understanding the context. A couple of clarifying questions that I have. The first is in speaking with your membership, are some of the challenges around the ability for the school to communicate with families more site specific than district specific? Did you have individuals from every school site identify this as something, or was this something that was more of a challenge at some campuses than others? I'm just wondering what that might have looked like in your engagement with your staff, or excuse me, with your association.
So we actually requested teacher testimonies in regards to those that are bilingual or at least know enough of a language to communicate. And on every school site, there are teachers who did not accept the stipend. Some in fact, because they felt that their language skills were not enough to request that stipend. But because there is a very high need for translation services and interpretation, even though teachers that aren't getting any compensation are often pulled to interpret for conferences or parent meetings and IEP meetings as well. So this is, we have quite a few testimonies from teachers. So this is an ongoing issue throughout our district. And I have also taken a look at the Phoenix Elementary School website, and thinking from the perspective of a family who may not be digitally literate, it would be very difficult for them to access even the communications that we've sent out as a district.
And Vic, I have a clarifying question as well for you that I think you can answer. Just to confirm, the current bilingual, it's not a bilingual stipend, the translation interpretation stipend is currently only for classified staff. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. There's one for 12-month staff who provide verbal and written. I'm just reading this from our nominal fee plan. There's another one for 12-month who provide verbal only. And then there is one for a seasonal employee that is verbal written, and then one that is verbal as well. And so that actually leads me to a second question, but I was just a little confused with the answer. I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. Are there testimonies from teachers on each campus, or do the testimonies not cover all of our campuses?
We recently asked for this information coming out of our last week, so we are still waiting on a little bit more data, but at our next session, would it be helpful for you to have some survey data on that from each individual campus?
Yeah, if you could, it would, and that's super helpful to know. Whenever we're looking at a district-wide decision, we know that our schools are all shaped differently. They all have different contexts, so we always want to make sure that it's a solution that's going to meet a lot of different needs. I'd imagine on this one, there's probably some idiosyncrasies that probably exist from campus to campus. So on that point that you just had, Jay, I do have another clarified question, just in terms of clarifying the proposal. Because we've seen an hourly wage of $30. We've also seen a total wage. Is the ask or the proposal is it that $30? Is that what the proposal is? Or is it a $3,200 stipend?
So those numbers come from what a translator right now in the United States receives as compensation for their language skills. That is where the $30 number comes from. What we stated is the hourly wage, which is most likely the ETR forms, which are $25 an hour. So you can actually see how much we are currently undervaluing the compensation teachers receive for their language skills.
So is the proposal then for $25?
Yes, or whatever the hourly wage is for the 21-22 school year.
Thank you, very helpful.
Any other questions from either side right now?
I did have one question, Vic, if you could clarify. Do you have a breakdown of all the languages that our staff members speak? Because I know Spanish is currently the predominant language, but we still have a lot of students that speak Somali, Arabic, Burmese, Thai, and indigenous languages. And because the languages tend to be in the minority in our school district, do we even have people that speak those languages? Because then that would mean that they're getting currently underserved across all school sites.
Mm-hmm. We do not have that, rolled up. The best estimation we would have on that is on an application. We always ask people what other languages you're proficient in, and then you can list them and you can say the level of proficiency you have, whether you're fluent, you're proficient in your conversation. So that would be the best stab that we would have at having that kind of data.
So can we get that data? We don't necessarily need the employee members' names, so just a breakdown of what people have said on their application forms.
I would need to know a timeline on that, and then I would also, that would definitely take us some time to roll up. The other question that I have, though, when we think about it, $25 an hour, is if we look at the support staff one currently at $1,600 and $1,100, would $25 an hour would potentially create some inequity, or at least inequality, as we would look at how a support staff member would be compensated for translation and how a certified staff member would be supported for compensation. I would imagine, but I'd just like to hear what thoughts you have on the support staff's translation stipend as it currently exists relative to the ask of $25.
So just to clarify, the question was, can you say the question again, Vic? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I guess in a simpler way, should certified staff be compensated at a different rate than support staff as it pertains to translation?
That sounds like it might have to be a bigger question that we reach out to the team of our union, because I think that's going to be something that is, I think there's going to be a few different opinions on it, and we want to hear. Could that be information we bring to you later this week after getting the chance to talk with our union members?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that'd be helpful because, there are other places, right, where a certified staff member who may have, more education, more training, more accredited training is compensated at a different rate than a support staff member who may not. Even though the thing that they're doing may be very similar, the degree to which they're able to do it is certainly different. And so it'd be helpful to know if that pertains as well to translation as we start to think about expanding translation compensation to certified staff members. I think another question that would be helpful for us as well would be whether or not PECTA would have a sort of opinion on administrators receiving a translation stipend. It sort of falls under the same category, I think, of why the translation stipend doesn't exist currently for certified. And so that would be another employee group that we want to look into.
And one more question for you, Dr. Diaz. Can you, and I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, so if you don't know, you don't know, it's okay. But can you break down what like a bilingual stipend used to look like potentially in the district, when it stopped, why it stopped?
Yeah, break down some of it, just from the pieces that I know, because this all is stuff that happened before I was here. We offered an ESL endorsement, bilingual endorsement to staff, but that stopped in the 2016-2017 school year. There are certain individuals who receive that stipend then who continue to receive it, but they were tied to endorsements. So if you had your SEI or your ESL endorsement, as well as your bilingual endorsement, to the point of the presentation, just because you're endorsed in something doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to adequately prepare communications to family members or community members in the languages in which you're endorsed. So it was never, I think, intended to be like a translation sort of thing in terms of getting the endorsement for the bilingual. It was really about having the extra certifications. Right. I think one of the reasons why it was phased out, this is very much a sad state of our teacher prep programs right now. There are universities in Arizona that do not offer bilingual education programs. And so we've definitely seen a lack of individuals who are graduating from accreditation programs with those bilingual certifications. Even that SEI endorsement, when I became an Arizona teacher, and Jay, I think when you did as well, it was required. You had to have that, and that's a requirement that's now managed. Ms. Millsaps, Ms. Bernal, you've been here for quite some time yourselves. I wonder if you could speak a bit more about, just those endorsements and those stipends.
Yeah, the bilingual stipend was not for translation purposes. It was for instruction. So when you received your bilingual endorsement, you were a bilingual instructor, and that didn't include any translation, services that you provided.
And Ms. Bernal, was it a stipend pay, or was it like, how did it work?
It was a stipend pay, and I mean this. I'm gonna date myself because back when I received it was about 1,000. Yeah. I don't know if that has gone up, but it was 1,000 a year. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And that was true as well for the SEI. So back in the day, that was an endorsement that you had to take and apply for to receive credits. And if you had that SEI endorsement, it was strictly for instruction, like your instructional strategies, and it was a stipend. I believe it was 1,000 or 1,200, and then they did away with that when the state made that requirement from everyone, because it used to be an option if you were SEI endorsed. So those were both for educational purposes and not for translation types of things where you were translating or writing written transcript for anyone.
I do have a clarifying question from Vic. Is Phoenix Elementary willing to provide training for its teachers to become accredited interpreters and translators?
That's a great question, and not one that I can answer. I know that we have done certain things like Rosetta Stone, for instance, in order to build language skills of our teachers. I also know, from being an educator myself, being bilingual myself, families would always rather have somebody who speaks a little bit of their language try to communicate with them through that language than to constantly, say, okay, can you please tell your mom, and then talking through the child, or having to call a language line and have the awkward, time that you're on hold while you're waiting for that language line. And so one of the things that we have done is we've made it easier for us to identify when a teacher candidate has language skills, and using that as a bonus, if you will, on their application. Even with the different recruiting agencies we work with, we specifically say, if you have somebody who speaks these languages, the ones we most often talk about, of course, Spanish, but also Burmese, Somali, as we've seen an influx of the refugee population in the Phoenix area, especially, and the recruitment trail, that is definitely something that we look for. And when we see it, we jump on it as quickly as we can, because those language skills are absolutely invaluable to us.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking if we can provide those is because, as Chelsea pointed out, under the United States Department of Education, especially when it comes to just having the language skill. It doesn't mean we have necessarily the interpretation credentials to do that. And I think immediately of an IEP meeting where the vernacular version of Spanish, and even for myself, I also speak Portuguese, it's not the same as the legal information you need to have. The reason I bring that up is because you mentioned accredited programs. And this is something for you to continue to look into as we can get your, so when we get your counter proposal this Thursday at 5, this is the current National Center for Interpretation from the U of A, and actually offers online modules for teachers. So the reason I bring that up is I notice we often provide a lot of opportunities for teachers to become SPED certified or even trained in Indian education. And this is probably something that we would like to see if you have more information in your counter proposal.
It's certainly something we could look into. I don't think it's something we would have Thursday by 5. If we think about this again as a budgeted item, this would have to be paid for from something. And so to have that information together by Thursday at 5 would not be something we'd be able to do. This is also new to us as it wasn't in the proposal. So it's not something that we've prepared any information on.
So the reason we didn't provide, just because in the information we received last week, it was just asking generally for more information. So we did want to just put it all out there for you to look at. In terms of moving the process along kind of as quickly as possible, as far as information from us, just to read your for a little more survey data on how our teachers and certified versus classified staff are feeling about this on campus, so that we can move forward towards a counter proposal? Or was there any other information that you would need from us?
No, I don't think there's any need to gather any additional information. I would just want to see if it was information that you already had in terms of just the scope in terms of the challenge that what you're describing.
Jay and Vic, I have a question, or maybe something that we might need to consider. And I'm not sure if it's going on right now, but I know that in the past, the way that we differentiated between translation and interpreters was a test. There was some type of, assessment that our classified staff had to take. And that's when it was determined whether, yes, you have the skill set to do written, or you do not, but you speak the language, and then you're gonna be just an interpreter. I don't know if that's still happening, Vic. I don't receive that, and I know that based on the enrollment numbers, schools are allotted a certain number of translators and interpreters. So would that be the same? I guess coming from PECTA, is that what you're thinking as well? Is that based on enrollment numbers, we need to add 2-3 certified staff, that has passed, the assessment and is qualified to translate or is qualified to interpret? Is that what you're thinking?
I think our goal is that, just like if it's a substitute and you're covering for that class and you would fill out that sheet to cover those hours, it would be the same thing if I'm just looking at Felina. So if Felina covered translations for my teacher conferences for 30 minutes, she'd put those 30 minutes on an ETR type sheet. She'd get compensated for such. Is what you said something we'd be willing to consider? Yeah, that's something that if that's a compromise that I think we as a team would probably definitely talk about. But for right now, I think it's safe to say that we're focusing on the ETR type payments, but would be willing to have that conversation too.
Yeah. Something to consider as well in regards to allotted people on site. Most of the people that translate on site are available during certain hours within a day. And when you're trying to do a phone call after school, along with every other teacher on campus, it becomes difficult to navigate and get that translation done in a promptly manner. And then, of course, with parent-teacher conferences, 2 people on a school site are not able to attend parent-teacher conferences for 90 families within the same time frame. So that's why we were looking at the hourly wage, because there are teachers with the skills and there are teachers that are willing to improve their skill set and earn credentials versus simply just having 2 people on campus that would be stretched thin.
And when we, one more thing to clarify, Mrs. Bernal, when we talked about this originally, one of the first things, it was either Felina or someone brought it up saying, we still need to have this, you said like the acceptance test basically, where, yeah, you can't just, I know enough Spanish to get by if I had to, but I don't feel like I'm qualified enough to have that compensation. So totally agree with you on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So just to make sure I'm understanding correctly then, to sort of summarize my understanding, the ask is for the hourly rate at sort of an unlimited budget, just based on need. Any teacher who meets whatever the qualifications are can pop in at any point and then submit it on an ETR, but there's not a cap per campus or anything, like for budgeting purposes. Anyone who could pass could do it however often. Am I understanding that correctly as the biggest picture ask?
Yeah, so you're saying, what you're basically saying is like, what's the max, right?
Yeah, is there a max?
Well, I mean, right now we don't have a max proposed, okay, but could there be a max? Yeah.
And then one more question that's probably more for the principals. I'm curious how often you are asking teachers to step up versus this is something teachers are noticing as an issue and stepping up and handling it. Like, how often do you have to pull someone from their conference to pop over into a different classroom to support a family?
I know at Garfield, Dr. Brown, we don't do that. The teachers are the ones that step up, for their teammates, and they, volunteer to do that. And I know we are fortunate. It might not be the case at other schools where we have a bilingual school psychologist, and then we have bilingual special education team members. So they take care of the translation for the IEPs, because whenever I'm in a meeting, when they're scheduling, that's probably the second question that comes up is, do we need to translate and who's gonna do it? And then they sign up for it. But again, that might not be the case at other schools. So.
I think what I've heard, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. And at Dunbar, we are very fortunate that our IAs are bilingual. And so, they work so closely with the teachers that the teachers request their time depending on if those translation services are needed for that conference. And then any of our certified staff work within their grade level bands, and then they support each other. And then we have our 2 office managers that also translate at meetings.
So Dr. Diaz, is it okay? This one kind of seems like it would take more time than 3 days, basically, to get to us. Is it okay if we have maybe a district response to this one by the next time we meet?
I think there may be some more information that we can provide Thursday by 3, or even with the remaining time we have here. I am noticing that it is already 5 o'clock. So
yeah, same here.
We do have limited time. I think one thing that'd be helpful for folks to know is last year, the stipend committee did not meet because of everything that happened with the pandemic. We are reestablishing the stipend committee. Earlier today, I think just about an hour ago, actually, I emailed the PECTA leadership as well as ESPA's leadership to announce that. I think that one possible solution could be looking at the current stipend as it exists and really ask ourselves, I know that it's for support staff, but our support staff is the ones that are in the best position to do the type of work that we're describing here. Is there any reason why a certified staff member wouldn't be able to do that? I think, Ms. Rodriguez, you bring up a very important point when it pertains to people's work agreements and people's availability around urgent communications. Certainly during the time of COVID, we've seen the need for urgent communication more than ever. And so that could be one venue with which we could pursue expanding the compensation for translation. I think we would need to be clear that's translation, not interpreting. To your point, those are 2 very different things. And so we want to be, whenever we're offering that kind of compensation, we need to be very clear on what it's for. And then to Dr. Brown's point, we want to make sure there's some kind of accountability system that's attached to it to make sure that we're monitoring it. Jay, you mentioned the substitute system and the split pay, and that was something that did come out of Meet and Confer. It's a little different because there's a legitimate absence of a resource that the teacher is filling in, and there's money that was allotted for that resource that isn't being spent. And so that's why a teacher can receive that compensation. In terms of jumping into somebody else's parent-teacher conference, unless that person were to give up part of their compensation for being in the conference, it wouldn't be the same sort of personnel move when it comes to the compensation. So I think that's why you typically see things like this stipended more than their hourly made. But by Thursday, we could definitely run some numbers and take a look at what this would look like. I think as we discuss the next proposal, we'll also take a look at the ways in which the budget's going to be challenged next year. And so doing anything to the budget, whether that is a translation stipend or a partnering with an institute to do training on family communications of linguistically diverse families, those are all going to have very direct and immediate budget impacts that we're going to need to consider.
Okay.
So Thursday by 5, we will have information.
Okay.
Let me run some numbers so I can really get some estimates of what this may look like.
Okay.
I think the other ask Thursday was how we're currently communicating to families. We could certainly do that as well, because I think that does kind of help paint the picture of the working condition of a teacher who's being asked to provide translations. And then, I think those are the biggest parts for Thursday at 5.
Okay. Does anyone from either side have any more clarifying questions? Because we are pressed for time, but I also want to make sure that this next conversation we have is included in tonight's meeting. So. All right, so we'll look forward to that on Thursday at 5. Thank you, Dr. Diaz and the rest of the administration team. I'm going to throw it now to April, who is going to take over about proposal number 2. We're going to do a quick little driver change here. Felina's got to take care of something, so I will share or can someone else share their screen, actually? Someone on our team? With the slides.
Yes.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Oh, sorry, my instinct is to press share. I'm so used to being in Google Classroom and giving everything to my students. All right, proposal 2. Here you guys go.
All right. Dr. Diaz, you had questions. You had clarifying questions about our salary increase on proposal 2. May I address those questions? So let's start with Jay. Do you want me to start or do you want to start? We have 9 minutes.
Yeah, no. And is it? Can I first ask? Is it okay if we extend this till 5:30 today? Does that work for everyone here? I can't see everyone's thumbs, but is Vic giving me a thumbs up? That's all I want to know right now. Okay, good. Okay. So, so April, do you want to go over the clarification? I think we have a type. Do you want to go to the next slide, actually?
Yes.
Okay, go back. So one thing that we just wanted to go over really quickly, and for some reason, so if you look at bullet point number 3 right here, that's the first one that we wanted to go over. And April, can you kind of clarify for them what we meant?
So item 3 referred to the proposed salary cuts presented to staff in October 2020 for the following 2021 school year. And that was regarding the Prop 301 differences. So just to clarify, the retention stipend, the Prop 301 payout, and how they were decreased for 2021. Even knowing the one-time rainy day fund payout.
Mm-hmm. And then another clarification was just the cost of living So if you can go to the next slide, and to be blunt, and Dr. Diaz, I called you today about this, still a little confused. The cost of living, from talking to legislators, it still kind of seems like a process that isn't as set in stone as we thought it was potentially. So like I highlighted this paragraph in B, and I know that it talks about minimum wage, and we are not minimum wage employees in this meeting. But it also mentions how the minimum wage will increase by the increase of cost of living. So it talks about the cost of living. So I just wanted to share that with you there. So more, and I don't mean this in a rude way. I just mean this like honestly. If it seems like we don't know where we're going with this proposal, it's because we kind of still want to hear what you have to say, and see if there's any counter proposals ready from the district or budgeting. I'm kind of setting you up for a alley-oop here. So if there's any budgeting things you wanted to go over, the floor is yours, because as an association we'd like to hear a counter proposal so we can kind of try to work together.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to have Chelsea go back one slide so you could see. There you go.
Chelsea, you can just, I think Vic's going to share his screen.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
Yeah, I've got some information. I would say you'd be setting me up for an alley-oop if we had $2 million in the M&O budget just sitting around waiting to be spent. Because then at that point, you'd be setting me up for like a thunderous dunk. But we don't. And so I did want to take some time today just to share some budget numbers that we put together. Concerning that second item and that cost of living increase, I did talk to Janice Durham right before this meeting. And she confirmed that yes, when the base level is made, there are cost of living allowances that are put in the base level. She says it does fluctuate from year to year. And given our enrollment decreases, it typically does not equal a direct cost of living increase that would go towards salary, because that money is going towards any number of different costs other than salary. She mentioned, for instance, the rising cost of materials is often incurred within that cost of living increase that's in the base support level. So if we think about rising gas prices, rising insurance costs, whatever it might be, that base support level is going towards that as well, not just employee salaries and not just teacher salaries. So she did share that with me. And then we spent some time looking at our M&O budget over the past week or so. So I wanted to, share some information that I have about that. So this might look familiar to folks. This is a graphic that we put together about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, that talked about how our budget has changed since 2017, what our administration has done in response to the imbalances in the budget, and then what might be available. Oh, yes. Is it not working?
It wasn't. And then right when I tried to interrupt you, it started working. So I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm sorry. So in this document last year, we talked about that some things are going up, some things are going down. Salaries have gone up in each of the years since 2017. This is still true in 2020. Per pupil funding has gone up. Thank you, Red for Ed. Base level support has gone up. Thank you, Red for Ed again. And then insurance costs have gone up. In terms of the things that are going down, our enrollment continues to decrease, which also impacts our average daily membership. And that's what sets the base support level. We still see overall staff is going down. There were positions that were cut from the 1920 to the 2021 school year, and our title funds continue to go down. Certainly another bullet that can be added to this is the introduction of CARES and ESSER and those pieces as well. But I wanted to make sure here to talk about M&O, because when we think about salary increases, it makes the most sense to put those in your maintenance and operations budget, not in temporary funding sources, because that salary increase is something we want to make sure we can sustain from year to year. So last year, we shared these budget numbers showing how our budget is actually going down, even though per pupil funding and base level support is going up. And that's because our enrollment decreases are outpacing the additional money that we have in per pupil funding and base level support. Another way to show that was we showed the percentage of M&O that goes into salaries. And that last year, the 1920 school year, 82.4% went into salaries. That's a high number. That's a lot higher than you'd like to see in any organization. And so I captured here revisions that we made to the 1920 budget, as well as changes to the 2021 budget that we were looking at making, one of which was a $2.1 million cut to the M&O budget using performance-based budgeting to accommodate for a 300 to 400 student reduction, as well as additional expenditures that we would have. And so a year later, I updated this into this document just to sort of show where everything actually landed. So the first thing I want to point out is that we projected our 21 budget at 53 million. Our 21 budget has actually 51.7 million. That's not good. That means that this time last year, we thought we would have $53 million to spend when we actually only have $51.7 million to spend. The reason why that's happening is a couple fold. One, we have seen a reduction of about 381 students this year, but perhaps more importantly, students who are learning via distance online learning are continuing to be funded at only 95%. So because of that, we will be making a $1.5 million revision just for distance learning. And so our 2021 budget, again, even though per pupil funding and base level support is much higher now than it was in 2017, our budget is actually smaller than it was in 2017. Again, knowing the reduction in students that we have. The percent of M&O budget going to salaries has come down a bit. It's currently at 80%. I put a plus sign here though, because that could go up a bit as we pay end of year things like end of year stipends or end of year performance pay that may come from M&O. But we're still hovering right around 80%, which again is higher than we want to be, but it's a step in the right direction. I put on this document, I don't want to forget the things that we did in 1920 and to this current budget. If we look at performance-based budgeting, for instance, over the course of 2 years, we've cut $3.1 million from the M&O budget. We've also done about $3 million in budget reductions due to enrollment dips. We've continued a hiring chill across the district for the better part of 2 years. And we've increased base salaries for every employee by 5% in 1920 and by 2% in 2021. I don't have the cost on that 5%. It was something we're trying to put together. We just ran out of time. But I do remember the cost from last year was $860,000. So what I put down here is just what else we know about this budget for next year. The first, and this is a pretty big announcement, there is no anticipated cuts via performance-based budgeting. That's very good news for many people, because when we think about that $3.1 million we cut with PBB, for the most part, those were positions. And it wasn't just things being cut at the district level or at plant services. If we think about a school like Dunbar, we made significant cuts to special areas last year as part of performance-based budgeting. We made significant cuts to peer last year as part of performance-based budgeting. And so we are thankful that we don't see a need to have any cuts related to performance-based budgeting. But while that provides a certain amount of stability in our budget, it also provides less room for salary increases. Again, that $2.1 million was necessary to cut in order to fund the 2% salary increase that we saw last year. The $1 million we cut in 1920 was necessary to fund the 5% salary increase we did in 1920. The other update to provide is in our indirect costs budget. Last year, we had about $4.2 million in it. We said we were going to spend $1 million, and we have. We're now at about 3.1 million. We still do not anticipate any new funds being received into that indirect costs. So the indirect costs is part of our carry forward, and our carry forward is going to be continued to use to offset decreases in enrollment at about 7,000 per students. So 383 students is about $2.68 million. We set aside $3 million last year to have available for carry forward in anticipation of this decline. So I wanted to also take a moment to thank Janice Durham and her team. They've held very firm to their opinion and their analysis that we need a healthy carry forward as we're continuing to tumble in student enrollment. And boy, they've been right when we think about the past couple of years, because the average employee in our district has not felt any of these revisions. We haven't furloughed in the middle of the year. We haven't riffed at the end of the year or in the middle of the year. We haven't seen massive budget cuts where all of a sudden a resource that was available is no longer available. And that's because of the financial stewardship of Janice and her team, who continues to encourage us to make sure that we have these carry forwards. Another thing to know about the 2021 budget, or 2022 budget, it's very important, has to do with child nutrition. We know our child nutrition department is phenomenal. They've done phenomenal work for the past year. They've been on the front lines. And they've been providing meals to community at no cost, free meals to any community member who shows up. Well, it's at no cost to them, but it's at a cost to us because we haven't been able to bill the way that we normally would to the feds for that food. And so about $1 million of this 51.7 out of the M&O budget is going to be needed next year to balance child nutrition's budget. The good news is that may only need to be balanced for a year as we're now able to build students who are back in school. But it will be another piece of the M&O pie that is already going to be accounted for. And then the last piece just to share again is that the state has indicated it will continue to fund online learning at only 95%. As we think about launching our AOI, launching our online school, something that staff is going to hear a lot more about in the coming weeks. But you may have already seen that we have posted for the AOI principal, the iAcademy principal. That's the first step to building that school. Any student who enrolls in that, we would only get funding at 95%. This is a paradox. The state believes it costs less to educate a child online, but we have seen exactly the opposite as we've been all in the distance learning that we have been in, and as we're looking at launching the AOI. And so I share all these things not to like drop the mic or anything on the budget, but just to share the latest information that we have that shows that the $2 million proposal from PECTA is very difficult to find right now in a budget that's reducing from 54 to 51.7, and that's going to have all the pressure points that we see down here. I know we're at 5:18, but I'd be happy to answer any questions people have either about last year's budget and the update we did last year or this information here. And I can provide you this document after the meeting.
Nick, I have like 30 questions, but I'll start with this one. The first one is, how does, let's say legislation passes. I know that Senator Mesnard's bill about fully funding AOI is either through committee. It's progressing in the right direction. How would that change? I hate to say everything, but how would that impact the district?
Yeah, we can just say right away it would give us an extra about $1.5 million,
right, for
this year. So you'd see this 51.7 be 53.2, which is right around where Janet's had it last year.
Right.
In terms of thinking about the future year, it's hard to say. It's really going to depend on how many kids register for the AOI, or how many families, I should say, register for the AOI for their children.
Okay, thank you. I'll hold mine for the rest if anyone else has questions. All right, well, I guess I'm going to ask then. So can you basically, so that number you gave us for what it would be to be a 8% raise was 1.9 million, I believe, if you round it up. We'll call it 1.9. Can you break down who you're considering in that? So basically what I'm asking is like, what would the cost be to get a 1% raise, right? So I know it sounds like, oh, well, just divide it by 8. But when you look at like just from the budgeting information that we got, the only thing we can see on the listed items is certified and then sped. So it's kind of like there's 86, I think it's 86,000 that's kind of just floating in between like the math that we did based off the number you gave and then what's on the budgeting information. So I'm guessing that 86,000 is kind of just the leftover money that would go towards other certified educators. So whether it be social workers or nurses, whatever. So can you just break down and I think I know this answer, but who falls under the certified umbrella from your point of view?
Yeah, under the certified umbrella, certified teachers, we look at salary schedules. So anybody on the certified teacher salary schedule, anybody on the resource specialist salary schedule, social workers, nurses, LPNs, SLPs, SLPAs. I believe I already said nurses. PTs, OTs, and psychologists. I believe that would be everybody. So certified non-administrative positions. And that is
IEIS would fall under the certified teacher.
Yes, IEIS is around the certified teacher.
Okay.
And we did that based on PECTA's request last year to include all those employee groups in our estimates around the certified salary increase.
Yep. Thanks for clarifying.
So for a 1%, you could roughly divide 1948958. So if we're rounding up, call it 1950.
Yeah.
I was looking for a calculator around here. Let me just use one on my phone. It's roughly 243,750. So somewhere around $250,000 would be a 1%.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. I have another question now that we're nerding out with some data. Has the adjusted potential cost for the classroom site fund impacted this at all, or have we not gotten there yet? And I guess this is more of a Janice question, but and I'm sure she's excited about the and if you want to explain to everyone listening what I mean by that.
Yeah, as best as I can, knowing that, I mean, I did talk to Janice about this before the meeting, and she told me last week that this would be some good news, but it does look like the Classroom Site Fund will get more money next year, which is great, because if everybody remembers back in October, working with Ms. Pettit, we were telling you all about how the Prop 301 budget comes from Classroom Site Fund, and it's low. It's not at the level we need it to be at.
Right.
In terms of that money, one of the things she did warn me was that some of it's one-time money. So they shortchanged us last year. The good news is that they're going to give it back. The bad news is it's one time. Right. So we're not really sure where that would go. The other thing we learned is that there is a movement to get rid of the funds, Fund 11, Fund 12, Fund 13. The good news for that for districts is it just gives even more flexibility of how to use that money. So now what we currently use out of Fund 11, which is the $1,500 for all teachers, we could even take Fund 12 and Fund 13 money and use it for that as well. And so there is a chance that we're going to see that $1,500 classroom site fund go up. And that's very good news. It would increase compensation. It would not be a % increase to your base salaries, but it would be an increase in compensation. I did ask Janice if we could have an estimate of that sometime soon. She said she'd get working on that. I don't know if we'll have that Thursday by 5, but whatever update I have on Classroom Site Fund, I can be sure to share Thursday by 5. But again, it would not be a % base salary increase. Mm-hmm. It would be in addition to the Classroom Site Fund.
Right, of course. I think that's all I have. I actually wrote down notes of questions I wanted to ask you about this one, so sorry.
No, that's okay. And I really appreciate the sort of panoramic look at compensation. Yes, base salary is very important, maybe the most important thing. And again, relative to the other ask on salary schedules, it is something we need to take a much closer look at preparing for the 22-23 school year. When TIF4 is gone, we're going to see the pain points on the base salaries that we see with all other employee groups around the district right now. Teachers don't really see that pain point quite as acutely because of all that TIF money. Those of you who don't get TIF money, you do see it. And that's an increasing number of people every year. So it is definitely something that we need to get a handle on for the 22-23 school year when the TIF money is gone. In the meantime, though, additions to things like Classroom Site Fund or compensation related to stipends, things like that, those are definitely going to shore up and keep people's compensation at a good level. Right. And then buy us more time. And when I say us, because that's going to be a collective effort through the Pathways to Success Committee to look at salary structures and to look at compensation internally and externally.
Right. So would it be fair to say that looking at Classroom Site Fund and other means potentially, what we're looking for, we're not looking for a quick fix. We're looking for a sustainable fix, but in the meantime, it could present a nice bridge between right now and the potential of Prop 208.
Oh, absolutely. And I think Prop 208 is also part of that bridge.
Right.
So, I mean, relative to the third item in the proposal, which was referring to salary cuts,
Mhm.
you know, there's a couple magic numbers that are in all of our heads.
Right.
One is 1,900, because that's the loss in retention stipends. It's going to go from 3,000 to 1,100.
Right.
So if your classroom site fund, or if your Prop 208, or if these other measures were to start making up that 1,900 gap, that's one less thing that you would see salary reduction for. Another number that's in our head is 2.4 million, because that's the cost of TIF 4. And so if we had a M&O budget right now that had $2.4 million sitting in it, we would probably be talking about how to make right TIF 4 money for teachers for many years to come. But we know how divisive an issue that can be, because not everybody gets TIF 4 money.
Right.
And so, yeah, those are all different numbers that are swirling in our head as we're thinking about compensation models.
Mhm.
So the TIF 4 money, definitely a much bigger issue than the $1,900 retention stipend gap. And so if we were to see something in the CSF get added, that would be the first place my mind would go. I think at this point, you know, I hope you're seeing transparency from us as we're communicating about compensation. And so that would probably be, you can see right now one of our charts that would show you used to get a $3,000 retention stipend and a $1,500 classroom site fund. Well, next year you're going to get an $1,100 retention stipend, but look what happened to your classroom site fund. And so that's where this might be going with the classroom site fund. Again, Thursday at 5, I might have some numbers, but definitely as this goes on over the next couple of weeks, we'll get some numbers attached to that.
Okay, so what can you commit to? I know pressure's on kind of, but like just to go along with the process, what by by Thursday at 5, can we get? Is there anything that you can, kind of not guarantee, but kind of ensure that we can get maybe even if it's a counter proposal, or like, hey, this is where we're looking, or I don't know, what's on your mind with that?
Yeah, Thursday at 5, I'll have an update on classroom site fund. I'm hoping with the information I'm showing now that to think that we can find that, again, that $2 million for a 8% raise, that won't happen, Thursday by 5.
Yeah.
And again, announcing today that there's no anticipated cuts to the M&O budget through PBB.
Right.
Also Thursday by 5, there wouldn't be another number that we could share.
Right.
Essentially, by not making cuts, we've already said we're spending all of that $51.7 million.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way there'd be money in there for a base salary increase is if we underwent a cuts process. So in terms of what we can commit to is that if we're not able to find a base salary percent increase in the M&O budget, we are actively looking at these other sources of income, these other sources of funding and compensation,
right,
in order to shore that up.
Cool.
And make sure that people are getting the compensation that they deserve.
Okay.
We are proud that on average, our teachers are the highest paid elementary school teachers in the county. And if you're the highest paid in the county, you probably are in the state. And so I think the commitment we can share is that we're committed to keep that going for as long as we can, looking at every piece of compensation in this sort of panoramic way.
I know April has one clarifying question, and then.
I do. When you talk about the percentage of M&O money spent on salaries and you say ours is high, what is the ideal percentage, like in your head, that it should be?
Yeah, for organizational soundness, you want that number to probably be more in the 70 to 75% range. And that all just goes to, for all of us to have our own personal budgets, right? You don't want 85% of your paycheck spent before you get your paycheck, because now you don't have any money for anything else that may come up. The same thing happens with your organization's budget and your salaries. So you don't want to be at a point where every dollar that's coming in is instantly going out. And then you don't have the flexibility that you're going to need if something were to happen.
And is there a reason it's gone up so significantly since 2017? Is that to do with the end of McKeesa and TIF 4, or?
Yeah, I think the biggest reason you'll see that it goes up, it's not coincidental, it happens during the raises from Red for Ed for the 20 by 20 plan that put more into salaries, but because of the enrollment decrease we had, it didn't get added at the same level. So whereas the state, might have said, give that person a raise and we're going to give you $1 for every student. Well, we had so many fewer students that $1 didn't get stretched quite as far. And so that's why those numbers, it's not coincidental. You'll see them raising during the 2020. Now, when I say that, I don't mean to say that those raises weren't important, vital, precious, earned, the most important, significant thing that happened in Arizona's public education in 25 years. But that's what happens with those percentage increases. And so that's why you also see at the same time the need to do those performance-based budgeting cuts in order to make sure that money is being firmed up.
Thank you.
We've also just hit the point too where in any organization, when you're going through cuts, and people that were here in 2009, you know this very well, there comes a time where you start hitting bone with the cuts you're making. You're not just cutting fat, you're not just cutting muscle, you're not just getting lean, you're really starting to chip away at things that are at the bone. There are certain places in our district that are at the bone. I think the home of the Dragons is one of them. You can't really cut a whole lot more from them. And so if the cuts, can't be commensurate to the salary increases, you'll also see the salary numbers start to go higher.
So since you brought up the Red for Ed, is it possible by our next meeting to get a breakdown of how the district spent the 20 by 2020?
Yeah, I saw that on your slide. I think so. The reason I say I think so is that from day one, this has been a little bit of three-card Monty from the legislature and the governor, and so it's not as clean as it sounds. And so I can ask Janice though if we can get a look at that.
Wonderful.
And that's part of what happened with the CSF. They took some of that money last year and tucked it into CSF for some unknown reason that wound up shortchanging us on the classroom site.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Dr. Diaz, can you clarify this question for me? The 381 students drop in enrollment, when was that last taken? I'm just curious to see if that is current. Since we've returned to school, I know in my class personally, I've had many students return. So I'm just kind of curious, is that 381 as of today or current?
Great question, Ms. Antun, and something we were very interested in seeing as well. That's current, I believe, as of the end of February, because that's when the budget revision has to be made. But we have all thought, hey, as we reopen, are we going to see a bump up in students? In terms of that, on the average daily membership, it's going to take time until we have those kinds of numbers. But I looked at it more anecdotally in terms of class size. So if folks will remember from last year's Meet and Confer, I do a monthly class size report where I'm looking at general education students. I ran this report last week. On February 21st, 2020, the district had 5,761 general education students. On March 31st of this year, we had 5,277. So if we do the 5761 minus 5277, I'm seeing people typing away. You're going to get this number faster than me. So if you have it, feel free to shout it out. That is 484 students. Now that's just general education. We've seen special education actually increase a bit. And from day one of the last 9 years of enrollment decreases, the special education population has not decreased nearly at the rate as the general education population has. But I was hopeful on March 31st that we would have seen this sort of bump. We did see it. If I look at March 31st versus February, I think I read it on February 22nd, there was an increase across the district of about 120 students. That's awesome. That's the direction we want to be moving in. 120 students, relative to the 484, it's still a small jump up.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to the teachers. I mean, when we really think about enrollment and when we think about engaging with families, you are on the front lines of that. I'm a big record and stereo nerd. Jay knows that about me. And I'll tell people all the time, if you're building a stereo, you can get the horrible stereo, but if you get great speakers, it's going to sound awesome. But you can buy the most top of the line stereo, and if you get a pair of junky speakers, it's going to sound awful. Relative to the schools, teachers are speakers. I've seen phenomenal teachers cover up for gross inadequacies at the systems levels of schools. I've also seen incredible systems planning at schools go haywire because of implementation in the classroom. And so with that being said, all those enrollments, all these different issues, I know that you all are on the front line of it, especially during this pandemic. And thank you for everything you're doing for all of us.
Thanks, Vic. That means a lot. It's been a time during this pandemic for sure, and it's nice to hear some positive words. Is there anything else that anyone would like to bring up before we go ahead and schedule next week's meeting and look at deadlines?
Yeah, I'll just share some information with you, Dr. Diaz, for Janice when you follow up with her on Classroom Site Fund. So Fund 11, 12, and 13, Senate Bill 1139 did go through. So the pots that were distinct are now all one pot. And you had mentioned one-time money about not knowing how much. I just wanted to share what we're calculating about how much is one time. And so the number that we have is 26% will be one time, which is 192 of the 733 per student will be one time.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Liz. I really do appreciate it.
No problem.
Thanks, Liz. And for those watching at home, Liz is our wonderful organizational consultant for AEA. She does a great job, and she's a great community member too. So, let's just go over the asks for Thursday at 5. I believe the asks that we're asking you are one from Felina and Chelsea's presentation would be a counter or some language to proposal number 11. Am I missing anything from that, Chelsea? I don't think so. No? Okay. And then from same thing with 11, kind of just a general understanding. You said you're going to crunch some numbers and get back to us on that. You're going to try to get it to us by Thursday at 5. Speaking of deadlines, is it okay with you if we hold on presenting what we want to bring up next until Thursday at 5? Is that okay with you? Just so we as a team can come together and figure out where we want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm understanding correctly, we said last week that next Thursday we would discuss proposals 2 and 6. And so it sounds like now on Thursday at 5, you'll let us know if we're going to discuss 2 and 6.
Was it 2 and 6?
I'm sorry, 6 and 8.
6 and 8. Yeah. Okay. That's tentatively our plan. We'll confirm with you on Thursday by 5, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you let us know Thursday by 5, just the agenda for next week.
Yep.
Yeah, that would certainly be helpful.
Great. We can definitely do that. And to respect people's times, which it's funny to say 30 minutes late, we are going to go ahead and end this meeting at 5:40. Thank you all so much. Hope you had a great Monday and hope you have a great rest of the week.